Remedy Entertainment is a Finnish-based developer who has a long and storied history of making some fantastic video games. Led by creative director and writer Sam Lake, Remedy has pumped out some of the best and most interesting games of the past 2 decades. The original Max Payne and its follow-up, The Fall of Max Payne, basically pioneered bullet time mechanics in the games industry. The criminally underrated Quantum Break with its time manipulation gameplay and its video game/TV show hybrid presentation, not to mention the mind-bending Control, who had won a few Game of the Year awards in 2019. While all of Remedy's titles aren't perfect, they're all unique, offering some new twists on a third-person action game and employing some out-of-the-box narratives that stick with you long after the game stops spinning in the disc tray. The game that stuck with me the most and turned me on to what Remedy was doing was Alan Wake. Alan Wake was long considered vaporware for years, starting development shortly after Max Payne 2 in 2004 and going through a tumultuous development cycle lasting about 6 years. Finally releasing in 2010 exclusively on the Xbox 360 and PC, Alan Wake delivered something new for the horror genre with interesting game mechanics and an exciting and compelling narrative filled with twists and turns. Alan Wake's setup and story are heavily inspired by the works of Stephen King, as well as David Lynch's TV show Twin Peaks. And just like those inspirations, Alan Wake's narrative hinges on mystery and intrigue. Alan and his wife Alice plan a vacation retreat to Bright Falls, Washington to get away from Alan's work as a writer, suffering from a 2-year-long bout of writer's block. Upon arriving at the cabin in the middle of Cauldron Lake, Alan discovers the getaway was a ruse, set up by his wife who's contacted a local psychologist about Alan's writer's block, even going so far as to set up a room in the attic with a typewriter for Alan to focus on his work. Furious, Alan storms out of the house but immediately returns after hearing his wife's screams for help. Finding the railing broken and Alice sinking into the lake, Alan dives in after her, causing him to black out. 1 week later, Alan awakes, finding himself in a car wreck in the middle of the woods. Not knowing where he is or what had happened, Alan sets off into the forest towards any form of civilization. He quickly discovers a manuscript he doesn't remember writing, and the events on the page seem to be coming true. That's one hell of a hook, and from then on, Alan Wake grips you and doesn't let go. There's twists and turns, drama, murders, explosions, kidnappings, possessions, it's got everything. Like any great mystery story, Alan Wake keeps the player constantly engaged in its plot. I don't wish to spoil anything, as I highly recommend playing through the game yourself, but finding out the cabin on the lake that Alan and his wife were staying at had sunk into said lake over 40 years ago. When Alan wakes up in a psychiatric facility, Dr. Hartman reveals to Alan that everything prior was a fabrication due to him not being able to mourn the death of his wife. Finding out that Alice didn't actually die but was being held captive by the darkness. Discovering that the darkness was using Alan to write itself into existence to take over the world, but Alan was able to write himself into his own narrative to break free and try to stop it. There's more where that comes from, and needless to say, it's extremely entertaining. Just like any great story, it helps that the main character is so likable. The titular protagonist is unique among his genre. Most third-person action games star some gruff, muscle-bound hero type saving the world and looking badass while doing it. This includes Remedy's previous games and Max Payne. Alan Wake is almost the complete opposite, a timid writer who just wants to get away from everything and enjoy a vacation with his family. Alan is forced to defend himself, with his only motivation being to figure out what's really going on and finding his wife. He's a relatable character, which makes him more endearing than your run-of-the-mill protagonist found in the genre. Much of this has to do with his inner monologues. Storytelling is a big part of Remedy games, which each game they produce having a unique way of telling said story. Alan Wake is no different. Like a lot of mediums, video games included, Alan Wake has narration from the titular character, whether that's reflecting on what had just transpired or working through events as they happen.
It took a moment, but then I recognized him. He'd been on the ferry when I first arrived here with Alice. He knew my name. We were headed in the direction of Lover's Peak. There was no way this was a coincidence. He was the kidnapper.
Normally, narration can be a lazy attempt at force-feeding players or viewers important exposition. Alan Wake very rarely suffers from this, as Alan's inner monologues and narration do a fantastic job of keeping everything focused, as well as giving insight into his character.
I'm okay. My head's fine. I had to lie about my headache and memory loss. He'd send me to a hospital for tests. I couldn't leave without Alice.
It also helps that the voice actor Matthew Peretta does a fantastic job delivering Sam Lake's masterfully written dialogue. Same can be said for its narrative structure as well. Alan Wake is told in episodic form. While game stories have been told in this way in the past, most notably like Telltale game series like The Walking Dead, Alan Wake's approach feels like it fits quite well, even if it can be a bit jarring at first. This is primarily due to Alan Wake being modeled after shows like the aforementioned Twin Peaks or Twilight Zone. Each episode is like something you'd see on HBO, with a continuation of the previous episode concluding in a big cliffhanger. I will admit it can feel like a bit of a roller coaster sometimes, ramping up and slowing down constantly. But if I'm being honest, I feel Alan Wake pulls this off better than something like Metal Gear Solid 5 did, just because you can really feel the inspiration behind it. Another way Alan Wake's story is told is through the manuscripts he's unknowingly written. The manuscripts aren't just a highly intriguing plot device, they're also integrated into the gameplay somewhat. Pages are scattered around the environment, either on the direct path through a level or hidden away in optional areas the players can explore. These pages offer a bit of a hint as to what's to happen next, and players can use this to their advantage in certain circumstances. It isn't integral to playing, and some might even skip this feature entirely. While it isn't as innovative as it could be, the seeds are there for something truly special, and I admire the attempt at something new and unique.
The bulldozer's engine roared to life. Mud and rocks flew as it fought for traction. It crashed through the concrete wall and landed heavily in the yard. If it were an animal, it would have shaken its head after the impact, fixed its eyes on me, and charged. Of course, it had no head, nor eyes. Shadows crawled on its form, twisting it into a monster. Then, it came for me.
That uniqueness extends to Alan Wake's main gameplay element, its combat. Just like most of Remedy's outings, Alan Wake is a third-person shooter of sorts, traveling down mostly linear pathways and interacting with one's environment to progress. And like most Remedy games, that simple base of a third-person action game is elevated by some unique ideas and mechanics. Alan Wake takes the concept of light versus dark pretty literally. With the darkness being the main threat throughout the game, light is the weapon used to defeat it, which comes into play in both combat and exploration. Alan Wake's combat is pretty unique to the horror genre, as it's interconnected with its atmosphere and story. Throughout his tormenting nightmare, Alan will have to fend off the Taken, darkness-consumed versions of people that want him dead. They're no more than a shadowy doppelganger of the various townfolks of Bright Falls, but the particle effects, distorted voices, and slightly off-kiltered body language make for an unsettling foe. The twist to Alan Wake's combat comes in the form of light and how it's used by the player. Typically, using a flashlight, lantern, or torch in horror games is mainly just used to see or to provide a false sense of security. In Alan Wake, it's used as a weapon. With the darkness being the main threat, it comes in a few forms. Most of the Taken are almost exclusively melee focused. Most will rush the player, taking swings at Alan if they get too close. Some can toss hatchets or axes from afar, making for some tricky dodges in between taking stock of the closer enemies. Finally, there's the larger Taken, wielding heavier weapons like sledgehammers or chainsaws. The darkness also comes in this strange goo form that can cover the floor or walls. This is the weakest form as it's stationary and only provides a threat if you're not paying attention. Finally, the darkness can possess objects. This can range from groups of birds that swoop down on Alan, to barrels, steel beams, farm equipment, or anything in the environment that can be tossed at the player. As the game progresses, more variants are added to keep encounters fresh. Targets can't be harmed by traditional firepower until their shadow is worn down using light. Aiming your flashlight at a Taken approaching you will cause it to falter and slow down. Hitting it with enough light will break its shadow, giving Alan an opening to pump it full of lead. Just like guns have ammo, flashlights have batteries, and using the flashlight in combat or in the environment will drain its batteries, requiring a fresh pair. While adding the light mechanic to traditional third-person shooting could be seen as an irritating extra step, its inclusion adds to the tension and overall atmosphere of the game. Having to dwindle down an enemy's shadow as the batteries on your flashlight quickly drain and they keep approaching closer and closer adds this anxiety of hoping their shadow will dissipate just in time to blow them away with your shotgun. Flashlights aren't the only light-based attack Alan has at his disposal. On top of the various larger and stronger flashlights, Alan can wield standard flares, flare guns, and flashbangs to defend himself against the darkness. Handheld flares are great for when you're overwhelmed, emitting light in a wide radius, allowing the player to repel any enemy within the vicinity while they heal, reload, or escape to a safer place. Flashbangs are similar to flares and are a good crowd control option. They can instantly kill any Taken affected by it, making them good options when in a pinch. Flare guns are the best of both worlds, offering a massive advantage against tougher enemies while also repelling smaller threats. All of the pieces come together rather nicely. The options are there depending on what items you have and what's being thrown at you. Knowing when to save your flares or flashbangs or when to use that flare gun, switching from your revolver to your shotgun or hunting rifle for bigger threats, focusing on a larger Taken as they could take longer to break their shadow, could cause smaller ones to race up on you and get a few hits in. While it's simple on the surface, the farther into the game you progress, the more dynamic the combat can get. There's some great set pieces throughout the game that play around with Alan Wake's light-based combat. For example, being without a weapon and only being able to hold back Taken with flares, using various lights around the environment to fend off attackers, having a helicopter searchlight cover Alan as he's attacked, and my favorite, using fireworks at a concert stage as Taken surround you. Light also is used in unique ways outside of combat. Other sources of light, like overhead lamps or construction lights, can provide safe haven from the darkness. This is your primary way of regaining health. While it does slowly regenerate, reaching a safe haven will restore all your health and usually have some supplies as well. All shadows will avoid well-lit areas, so running away from a fight to a light source is an option when resources are low or the odds are in your favor. Light is also used in exploration. Hidden around every level are various supply crates players can stumble upon. They're tagged by yellow markers indicating which direction to go, but these markers are only seen when hit with light. These stashes are important as they contain valuable resources like batteries, ammo, and extremely effective flare guns. Combat is broken up by light puzzle sections that add some variety while maneuvering your way through a level. Most of these aren't too involved. Get the power on, move a platform, navigate a maze, that sort of thing. But it does break up the enemy encounters nicely and creates a great pace for the game overall. Alan Wake isn't entirely bathed in darkness, as the other half of the game is spent during the day exploring various locations in Bright Falls. These are more story-driven sections focused on interacting with different characters and unfolding the mystery. Storytelling devices like radio broadcasts or TV shows delivers some great world building that fleshes out the town's culture and history. These sections offer a nice breather between tense nighttime sections, and it's interesting to see both the town and its residents during the day and the night. Bright Falls also offers some really great environments Alan has to traverse during his nightmarish vacation. Being in the Pacific Northwest, there are a lot of dense forests and vegetation. Besides woodlands, Alan will trek through mines, lumber yards, mills, parks, and farmlands, all standing out on their own and while also cohesively fitting together to form the town of Bright Falls. They're beautifully creepy as structures in an old abandoned mine rot and collapse, or construction equipment sways by itself in the lumber yards. Creepy is the best word to describe Alan Wake as a whole. I've been referring to Alan Wake as a horror game, and to be honest, that's not really fair. By Remedy's own words, Alan Wake is a psychological action thriller. The atmosphere is palpable as the wind whips, trees sway, the world goes in and out of focus, screeches or growls are heard off in the distance. The visuals are key as to why its atmosphere is so effective. Visually, for a 10-year-old game, Alan Wake looks great. The dense vegetation of the forest, the ambient light of a flare on the underbrush, the trees organically swaying in the breeze, the small but noticeable details in the interior environments. Besides some rough character models, Alan Wake is a very pretty game and would benefit wholeheartedly from a remaster on current-gen platforms. It's got the creep factor that I love, but if you're looking for something like Dead Space, Resident Evil, or Silent Hill, you won't find it with Alan Wake. It's more about that thriller part of the psychological thriller action description. The darkness will pick up objects and toss them at you, Taken will appear out of the brush or from behind trees. It won't require a second pair of underwear, but I don't think it needs to. The atmosphere does a great job at establishing tension on top of the situation Alan finds himself in. You're either trying to escape from the police or chasing a kidnapper or something to that effect, all while the lighting, fog, and environment design adds a layer of unease to everything. It's hard to put into words why I like Alan Wake so much. The pacing of not only the story, but the gameplay keeps adding new twists as soon as things might seem to be slowing down. The combat is tense and chaotic at times, and coupling that with the atmosphere creates this thrilling experience in between narrative revelations. I just genuinely enjoy how different and sometimes weird it is from your typical third-person action or horror game. For me, I often prefer gameplay over story and narrative, but Alan Wake is a bit of an exception. The gameplay and story work in tandem with each other, with the narrative pushing the player forward and the gameplay keeping them on their toes. While the gameplay is fun on its own, the narrative keeps you hooked until the very end, and that's a testament to the writing. Its episodic storytelling, its light-based combat, its incredibly entertaining mystery plot, everything about Alan Wake just stuck with me. It's a thrilling, pulse-pounding, intriguing, creative game that, if anything, has aged like fine wine. With the Alan Wake IP safely in the hands of Remedy themselves, and the new Control expansion featuring the titular author, now was a better time than any to revisit one of my favorite experiences on the Xbox 360. One can only hope we see Alan again in the sequel he most certainly deserves.
Now if it's real or just a dream, one mystery remains, for it is set on moon.